Well, we are excited today because for our Sister Straight Talk on the Brain Game series, we have invited a guest to be with us, Lucretia Berry. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Krista and Alex. Thank you for having me on the Brain Game. I feel a little smart.
Well, you are smart, and that's
Yes.
part of why we invited you here. Because you're very smart. You are Dr. Berry, in fact, and not that you needed initials for us to know that you're smart, because even without initials, we know that. But we are excited that you are here to talk about this and to bring some of your expertise to this conversation, because we feel like it really does round out the conversation. So to jump in for the three of us, and let's just, really start talking about this idea of the intersection of neuroscience and our thinking and faith, because faith informs all that we do. And can you just tell me that how has learning about the brain impacted you and the way you think and the way you operate? What has this idea of, well, let me word it this way. How has the research about neuroscience informed your day-to-day living?
Well, understanding how we are designed and is helpful, right? So then we know, or I specifically know, knowing that, for example, my brain is wired to unconsciously process. Most of our unconscious processing is like 95 to 98%. So I can say I'm smart, but really I am conscious and responsible for only 2 to 5% of my processing, or what I'm thinking, or how I'm being, or how my thoughts are informing my actions and my practices. And so, when I know that, then I can, first of all, slow down and be aware of what I am thinking and how I am thinking, and how my thinking is informing my beliefs and my actions. I can intentionally also question, acknowledge that 95 to 98% of the things that I, for example, did not give my brain permission to take in. I didn't put those things there, but knowing that, okay, I'm shaped and formed by, the society that I live in. And so then I can ask those kind of questions. And I can also, just think about, like things that maybe seem normal or the norms. Well, why are they normal, right? So I can question why they are normal, because oftentimes our norms can prohibit us from being like fully ourselves and really like evolving into who we are designed to be, or to our fullest potential. And so if I'm aware of how the brain works, then, I'm aware of maybe the challenges and the opportunities. One of my favorite passages in the Bible that guides a lot of the work I do is Romans 12:2, which says, do not allow this world to mold you in its own image. Instead, be transformed from the inside out by the renewing of your mind. As a result, you will be able to discern what God wills and whatever God finds good, pleasing, and complete. That was the Voice version. And so, first of all, neuroscience tells us that we are neuroplasticians. And that's good news, because that means we can rewire our brain. Like, as humans, we are these beings who can think about the way we think, and we can transform our thinking. And in that passage, it's implied that we are molded by systems and narratives. We are molded by the world. which then kind of puts us in conflict with the way that God is thinking. But, it says we can be transformed by the rewiring of our brains, by the renewing of our minds. And then we can align ourselves with the way God thinks, the way God sees, and the way God wants us to operate. And so I really appreciate how neuroscience is essentially affirming our faith.
I 100% agree. And I feel the same, that when I learned some of the structures around how to help my brain kind of harness the brain in a different way that is for good and for better in my life, it changed everything, and it aligns with scripture, right? So it's, oh yeah, God already told us this. We just need then, have had to catch up. I think what's intimidating though about neuroscience, at least for me, is that I can feel really out of my league. Like, what am I even talking about? Like because I've done a lot of reading on neuroscience, but I still feel like I don't even know what I'm talking about, because when we interview someone like Kurt Thompson, I'm like, he knows what he's talking about. Wait, what'd you say? What'd you say again? How did you say that? And yet I think what has been helpful for me is to realize, okay, there's people out there like Kurt that are making it less complicated for people like me to understand, so that I can really harness these concepts and use them in my day-to-day life for the betterment of my life and for truly more spiritual victory. And that's what it comes down to, is I can have better thinking. God tells us to renew our mind. Well, so how do we do that? And that's one of the things actually that I've taken from neuroscience as one of the most profound things that I've employed. And that is this idea, and as an emotional being, this is why it speaks to me so much, is because if we let our emotions lead, so if our thought pattern goes emotion, then the thought, then the behavior, and then the relationships, and then the consequences, that's kind of a disaster waiting to happen, especially for someone like me that may be more emotional in the moment. So like if we let our emotions lead, our emotions may be negative, or maybe we're discontent or we're bothered. And so then we let that inform our thought, which then we've got kind of that negative thought that then we ruminate on that negative thought. And then we act out in response to that emotion leading, right? Because emotions are really good followers, but they're not good leaders. So when we let them lead, then we start this kind of path of destruction. And then our relationships end up really disunified, disordered, separated, from people, because our behavior follows that. But if instead we let our thoughts lead, and God tells us that, renew your mind. And for me, when I learned that when you take your emotion from the amygdala and you throw that into the prefrontal cortex, which is in charge of reasoning and rational thought and slow processing, when we can pause and take that moment and go, okay, I'm having this feeling. I'm going to take that to the prefrontal cortex, which is my thinking brain. And I'm going to let that lead my feelings instead of my feelings leading my thought. That changed everything for me. And I would love to hear if you both have had that experience, but that has changed everything, because then that renewed thought leads my behavior, which then leads my relationships and leads the consequences into a positive instead of into a negative. So I feel like this whole idea of neuroscience and the information that I've received from neuroscience has literally transformed the way I think in a way that I can grab onto, because I can read that scripture and say, okay, renew your mind, Krista, renew it. But how do I do that? Like, what does that mean? And when I got the tools from neuroscience to really understand how that works, then it really did transform my life. So that's why I find neuroscience to be so powerful. So if either of you, can you relate to that? Have you had that kind of experience?
Yeah, I think the idea of how, okay, I want to do that. I'm feeling fear, or I'm feeling anger. My instinct is something that is meant to protect me. But then how do I go to that rational place if I'm all these feelings? And that's where I think Philippians 4:8 is so helpful in telling us what to think on, because then we can get more specific. And it says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think on these things. So then I can say, okay, I don't know what to do. I'm feeling angry and I don't want to respond out of that anger, yet I want to honor it. It's a warning sign, right? That something's up that I need to pay attention to. But then to move from, what did you say? The amygdala to the prefrontal cortex, the back of the brain to the front of the brain. Then I have a list of things to say, okay, I can ask myself, what is true right now? What do I know to be true? So in that pause moment, what do I know to be true? What do I know to be admirable or honorable or lovely? What is excellent right now? What is praiseworthy right now? And then that list helps me. So I can totally relate to that feeling of overwhelm and emotional response and wanting to move into maybe a little more rational thinking. And yet, how? And that list starts pointing me to some specific things that I can then train my brain to think through and think on, and that will center me a little more.
Mhm. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Nope, you go, Lucretia.
Oh no, several years ago, I read Who Switched Off My Brain? Controlling Toxic Thoughts and Emotions by Dr. Caroline Lee. Okay, and so yeah, so that was the light bulb, for me, in understanding that, okay, yeah, like the how to rewire, how to transform. And yeah, Alex, just like you said, like the exercises in the book, have a lot to do with, or, you write down your thoughts, because I was struggling with not only unforgiveness, but like vengeance. Like I wanted revenge. But I didn't, right? Yes, vengeance. I didn't want to feel that way. And I know that that would only hurt me more ultimately. And so then, yeah, how do I, so in that instance, when these particular things happen, that my brain has, formed this unhealthy association and now a pattern and a pathway. And so then over and over, it's kind of going back and forth along that pathway and making the pathway like even stronger, even, more sturdy. And so then, I learned to do this exercise. Well, okay, I'm gonna write my thoughts down. Yeah, and then begin to find the gaps, then begin to think on, yes, what is also true. Okay, that happened, but what is also true, and then begin to weaken the pathways to that, and then strengthen the new associations. So create these new associations, and then strengthen these new associations. I mean, so sometimes we know that we're supposed to forgive, but like how? Sometimes, like, what is that practically? How do you walk that out? I mean, I know I can't just say, oh, I forgive a person, and then just like that, it's over. Like, no, I really want revenge. And so I'm going to learn how to, put those, help my brain work, for me, not against me. And to think on the things, create these pathways, these associations that are healthy, that are good for me. And so, yeah, like, for example, with one particular instance, like, okay, I know that this person is a dangerous person. But because, but I'm not suffocated anymore by that thing that happened, or by that memory, because I have managed to create more patterns, healthy patterns and healthy associations in the brain.
Hmm. It really reminds me, Lucretia, how literally our thinking makes our life and it makes our soul. And that's sobering. Like, as I'm listening to you, it's so true. Like, you weakening the negative pathways and strengthening the positive pathways, that's literally making you. I think about, there's a John Wooden quote that I love, and it basically says, we make our decisions, and in the end, our decisions make us. And that is just true. And I think about, like, you're literally being made by weakening the pathway and strengthening the positive pathway, or maybe the pathway of gratitude, or whatever pathway, you're replacing with the other one. So that's powerful. Something else I have found just in learning about the brain and our thinking that has been powerful for me is, so there's, when they, psychiatrists go through their training, they learn there are 3 core lies that we believe about ourselves. And it's this: I'm helpless, I'm worthless, I'm unlovable. And I just think those are so interesting that professionals are trained to kind of come back to those 3 lies. I'm helpless, I'm worthless, I'm unlovable. And it's interesting because as I learned about those, I was thinking through, like, is that true? Does every negative, kind of lie we believe, does it really come from one of those? And most of the time, our answer is yes. And so that has been enlightening for me also, to think in terms of those, and then to say, okay, right now I'm feeling worthless, or, whatever the lie is. Okay, now, is that true? And then that's where we go to scripture. Well, does scripture say that I'm worthless? I don't think so. I think Psalm 139 actually says, like, I was pretty intricately woven in my mother's womb, and God has, really good plans for me and literally created me in a really specific way. I don't think I'm worthless. Right. And then we start that renewal process that takes it to the prefrontal cortex. But to me, even being to identify what lie of those 3 am I believing right now has been really helpful. Have either of you do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, for me, that was very helpful. So it's helpless, worthless, unlovable. And that second one is the big lie for me. Whenever I am struggling, I can always trace it back to that is at the root of whatever anger, fear, all of the energy that's opposite of love comes from that for me.
It seems as parents and spouses and friends, if we have those 3 kind of in the back of our minds, when we are engaging with somebody who is not living into their full God-given identity, we can speak words of hope that counteract those 3. And so hopefully be helping to add a different narrative. Now, we can't make people believe, right? If they're believing a lie, they're believing a lie. But if we offer other viewpoints, it's almost as if we can play this active role in the voices that they hear. But that's really interesting. I would say my primary is probably the first one. I'm helpless. Like, oh, well, can't change anything about that. I guess this is terrible, or this is inevitably going to end in, like, I don't practice my agency and say, okay, I actually, recognizing the truth, I may be helpless in parts of this, but I'm not totally helpless, because God has given me free will and I have agency to make some change in my life. And so that is interesting. I was wondering, as you said that, if each of us have one that we kind of defer to. And my guess would be yes. And my guess would be that would be mine.
Yeah. And I even think about just how like, how does Satan work in our lives? It's not obvious. It's not going to be like hitting us over the head with a baseball bat saying, I'm going to make you believe this about yourself. No, it's like these subtle lies that take root in our heart of, who do you think you are to do that or to write that? Or who do you think you are to, stand up and give a talk when this is happening in your life? I mean, it's the subtle lies that we start to believe. And this gets to something I learned on the podcast or on this series, when Kurt Thompson said that if the devil can get us to believe those lies, then we don't produce the creative work that we were planned in advance to do. And that thwarts the kingdom of God, right? And so that, if it's like, it really does start with the lie. And then that directly translates to we don't produce what we were meant to produce. And isn't that powerful when we think of it in those terms?
So powerful. And as I listened to him say that, I wish I could find my journal. I just didn't have time, and I have a lot of journals that literally Spirit told me that several years ago, before I was launched into the work that I do publicly. And I was preparing to give a talk, and I'm sitting in the hotel room, and I'm praying and journaling, and Spirit said to me, God wants you to let that thing go. And I was like, what thing? And Spirit said, God doesn't know what it is, but it's keeping you, it's weighing you down. And so I remember I drew this picture of my body. I could see it so, vividly. So I drew it with like an anvil, right? Or like a ball and chain, but around my waist, and it was pulling me down. And Spirit said, you can't, you're not able to create and be and do what you were designed to do, because you're letting this shame, actually, you're letting this shame hold on to you. And so I thought a few things were fascinating, because number one, when I said, well, what is it? And Spirit said, God doesn't know. Well, because yes, God's already forgiven me, and it's all not even a issue for God. And then, but of course I knew what it was. And so I remember saying, okay. And in that moment I asked for help. So how do I get this shame off of me? How do I get it, keep it from weighing me down? And God is so generous and sent me on a whole, excursion, and it was beautiful. But I had never heard anybody talk about how, the neuroscience of shame, in the brain, and how it's embodied in the brain. I was just, I listened to Kurt, and I was like, wow, thank you for articulating that I had actually experienced. And so it was nice to hear it explained.
That's really powerful, Lucretia. And I think about how probably you having that experience, then when you heard that, it gave you context for it. And you're like, yes, that's exactly what was happening.
Exactly.
In that moment.
That's exactly what was happening. And as soon as I walked, because I'm going to say it was like a whole year or more of this healing that I went through to get that, to get the shame off. And then boom, then I just burst into, the invitation to do what I do.
Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit what you do and how that story kind of led you or was part of your journey into this work?
Well, I mean, I was being invited into the work of racial healing. And again, I didn't even know what that was. Like, what is racial healing? What is that? It's what you've been through. Oh, okay. So I say all that to say, I am an educator. by profession, I have a doctorate in education. I am African American, and I grew up in the South. So in the South in the 70s and 80s. And so always acutely aware of how race was narrating identities and situations, and having to be equipped at a very young age to be able to navigate it in a way that, I could still, become healthy and whole and not, cynical and stoic and hopeless. And so then I married a white guy from Iowa, which of course complicated things, made things a lot more interesting. But from our, interracial marriage and our multi-ethnic family, we birthed not only 3 beautiful multi-ethnic girls, but also this ministry of racial healing. And with my education background, I brought all of that to this as well. And so I design education to help people understand more about race, like how it was invented and why it was invented and how we perpetuate it, and then how it actually molds us in ways we were not designed to be molded. And so I design courses and all kinds of learning experiences for people who want to learn, people who want to function in their agency, to be a part of change. And so my organization is called Brownicity. That's brown and ethnicity put together. Yes, that's what I do. It was waiting on me to get the shame off regarding something else, so that as soon as I did, it just flooded. And I say I started doing the work publicly because I've been doing the work, I feel like, my whole life in here. Mm-hmm. It was time for me to share this with other people.
So how has neuroscience helped you in the work that you do, which is it has a lot of potential for division, it has potential for hurt feelings, it has the potential for bitterness. How have you kind of integrated those things to assist you in that?
Well, right. So it was actually the whole neuroscience, and Romans 12:2 was like, I saw a door and an opening, because again, we are woefully undereducated. I mean, so undereducated about race and racism. And I think that's on purpose. There's just so much we don't know. And so where we have a lack of knowledge and a lack of understanding, fear is happy to feel that, fill that void. But what I saw in my own process on this journey of healing, I mean, there was a very specific season in my life where Spirit was constantly pointing me to race as a construct, the construct as problematic in our lives, like everybody's life, but was doing a particular healing in me. And so much of it had to do with, again, how we are unconsciously molded and shaped by systemic racism. And I know a lot of people are afraid of that term and afraid of that word, but it's as if, it's as if, fish keep dying in the lake. And so when it's one fish, you go, okay, what's wrong with this fish? And then it's 3 fish, you may go like, well, what did those 3 fish eat? But then, when there's all these dead fish in this lake, at some point you have to look at the lake, right? Or if everybody in the community is popping up with cancer, you don't look at their individual diets, right? You look at the environment that they live in. And so for me, it was about looking at how we've been shaped and formed by decisions that, people made a long time ago who had a potentially very different agenda than the one we have now. And I knew that, like, in my own healing, for me to see those things, see the lies, and then begin this process of detangling, deconstructing from these lies, detangling, disintegrating from the lies, and then begin to be saturated in the truth, in God's design, what God wants, what's the, God's will, discerning God's will for my life. It was just so profound in my own, journey. So then that's what informed how I moved forward into bringing this potential model or journey to other people. So if I can show you how, you've been molded and shaped and informed, and mostly unconsciously, and how I know you believe you are a good person, and yes, you are. However, 95 to 98% of our processing is not explicit, it's not conscious. And so if I can get to have people see these things, then they can move away from thinking that, move away from the shame of race and racism. There's so many people come with shame, like either shame from being white, or shame because maybe they feel like they are descendants of victims, or shame. Some people just have shame for not knowing, like they get upset about, oh, I didn't know all this. And I'm like, you weren't supposed to know. Like, please don't feel shame about that. Like, you weren't supposed to know. And so I'm here. The liberation is in first knowing and understanding, and then and then separating yourself from the lies and being emboldened by the truth. And then beginning to, renew your mind and allow yourself to be transformed so that we can create what we know is possible. We come from a just God, right? We are perfectly capable of creating, just a just society, a society where we value everybody. If God can value everybody, so can we, because we are, right? An extension of God. We can do that. So we're perfectly capable of doing that, but we have been taught to turn off our brains, right? And just kind of go with the status quo, or we haven't been taught to challenge those unhealthy pathways, but we can, and it's totally doable. Because I feel like if I can experience healing because of where I was before, then surely people can experience healing.
I really go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that the thought process of stopping, and when we talk about unconscious bias, of stopping and saying, pausing when you have a thought and asking yourself, where did that thought come from? Where did that belief come from? That's part of the reprogramming and asking, why do I believe this? Or why did I just have that instinctual response? Or what about that made me feel uncomfortable? And I've been working on that probably for the last 6 years, when I felt like my eyes were starting to be open to some things that were just unconscious, that I didn't realize were part of how I was wired, not because of anything anyone intentionally instilled in me or anything I intentionally chose. So I had to let go of that, right? That guilt and that shame, and to say, God, reveal to me what is true. I want to know what is true in my head and my heart, and I want to honor you. So it gets back to Philippians 4:8, like, think on what is true and then think on what is honorable. How do I then shift that mindset and say, I want to honor you. I want to honor my fellow humans that are made in your image. Help me to think more truly. And again, not because I was trying to think evil things. And so I want our listeners to hear that when we're in this process of kind of readjusting, we're just asking God, reveal what is true. Reveal what is true. And to not be afraid, because God already is there and knows.
That's right.
And to trust him in that, to say, I want more truth. And maybe it is an education thing about, I didn't realize that systems were designed a certain way, or I didn't realize these things, whatever it is, to not be afraid of it.
Yeah, and I think, and I feel like we can do that with maybe individual things in our lives, but when it comes to race, feels like all rationale is out of the door, like, or out the window, like, no, can't do it, because it's, and so it takes some honesty, trust, vulnerability have to be at work. So one of the reasons why I created What Lies Between Us, this is my first fostering first steps towards racial healing. I created this book as an introduction to help onboard people into the basic understanding. Like, here's the basic understanding of what happened, why it's still happening, and here are some questions to turn your brain on, like this. So I don't want people to think, oh, actually people do think she just put these questions in here. No, like, this is modeled after my own healing process, and we have to turn our brains on. And so these questions are specifically designed to turn your brain on. But the reason why like this was created was because people were vulnerable and trusted me, and they would ask me questions like one minister's wife who is white and Southern said, Lucretia, I have never in my life had a negative experience with an African-American man. So how come when I'm sitting in my car and one is walking down the street, I lock my door? And so I thought, wow, you must really trust me to ask me that question. Because of course, yeah, I wasn't going to judge her. I know what that's about. I know that it's, unconscious. I know that she could have learned it by observing behavior of her parents, or maybe watching something on television. And television is responsible for a lot of our, a lot of those things that get in there. We don't know how they got there. We didn't give them permission to get in there. But when you become aware of it, then you could check it. I have so many stories where people have told me that, yeah, they had that moment, or a mom, she's at the park, white mom at the park with her white kids, and then a busload of Black kids come, or kids of color come. And it instinctually almost, she felt like, whoops, got to grab my kids and get out of here. But she paused, wait, where did I get that from? Where did that come from? And so she sat there until it came, till her brain located the story. And then she corrected it. She acknowledged it. She corrected it. She took a deep breath and she kept playing. And she watched the children of color as if they were her own children. So yeah, I unfortunately, though, I want to say in popular culture, there is just so much shame and guilt regarding race. And I want to encourage people to not let shame keep you from creating, the society that we know is possible. And then of course, guilt is a it's a defense mechanism. Guilt comes in to say, like, something is important, it might be painful, and your body is like, nope, don't want to feel bad. So guilt comes to push it back down. And so, I would say, like one of my high school students said to me, he said, at first I felt guilty because I was benefiting from, these horrible things that were put on other people, and I was benefiting from it. He said, but then I thought, well, it's not about me, and he stayed on the learning journey, but I would say, yes, just say to your guilt, well, guilt, thank you for letting me know how important this is. And thank you for letting me know that, learning what I'm learning or feeling these feelings may be painful, but I can do this. Like, I can handle this. I will be okay, and I will be better for whatever, feeling a little bit of pain, or because, there's answers on the other side of that pain.
That's so good, Lucretia. It's just so good. And it actually reminded me while you were talking of when Kurt Thompson was talking about that we need to be people who are known and tell our stories. And then once we do, then our kids don't have to basically deal with the fallout of us not telling our stories. And I thought that was powerful too, kind of the generational impact of us not telling our stories and not trusting one another. And once we do that, there's power in it. And I was thinking of that while you were talking, and you were talking about building that trust. And really, it's about kind of sharing each other's stories, right? Like, this has been my story, and this has been my story. And let's trust each other.
Mhm.
And let's come together in this and come to truth in this together and be known by one another. And that feels like the way forward to me, you know? I mean, so it's kind of this cool combination of we're harnessing neuroscience, we're harnessing relationship, and for whatever topic. And in this case, it's racial reconciliation, which, I mean, such an important topic. And we can do this. Like, I think that's kind of my thought on this, is like, we can do this, everyone. We can.
Sisters.
We can do
Yeah.
it.
Like, we can do it. You know, we can combine these elements and really build trust with each other. And it works, and it's the way forward. So important, Lucretia. And one of the things I was also thinking about you as you were talking, I'm like, she's strong and gentle. And I love that combination. And that has nothing to do with neuroscience, but that is a good combination for us to model.
I like that.
Mhm.
You know, one of the teachers that I follow and love to learn from is John A. Powell. And he said, we have to be hard on systems and soft on people. And I love that. I know. And so when someone said to me, they said, you have a constitution like John Powell. I'm like, oh, that's the best. I like that. Yes, strong and gentle, because, you know, race has caused such an injury, right? And so sometimes, you know, and I totally understand why people would then want to take like that same, they would want to return violence with violence, like the same, you know, violent energy of racism, then, you know, we just use that. But that's not how we do it, right? It's, you know, we have to allow that to be converted into love. Now, love doesn't mean like, you know, you don't get the job done, you know, like love is powerful, but what love isn't going to do is reproduce the injury, right? Or even worse. So
Amen.
Right.
Amen
And so
to that.
love requires a little bit of honesty. If we don't want to redo that injury, right? If we don't want to contribute unconsciously or consciously to continued problems. And I just so appreciate it. And I love Krista's emphasis on, you know, we want to break this cycle for our kids. Every generation wants to leave the world a better place for their children. And some generations are able to do it and others aren't. And I'm not going to say whether we're doing a better job or not, because things are a mess, right? And I'm not helpless. I'm not going to believe that lie.
Yes.
I can't solve the problem of racism, but I can contribute my little part to asking myself, why am I having this thought? What about my belief system, unconscious belief system, is having me respond this way? And I can change that thought process. And that is what I can control. Lucretia, will you tell our listeners about your newest resource? Because we have so many moms and grandmoms out in the audience who don't know how to start this conversation with their kids, and they don't want to introduce something that's going to be harmful. They want to have They want to have this conversation in a productive, loving way. So tell us about what you've created that moms can use with their kids.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, I created Hues of You, the activity book for learning about the skin you are in. Now, this is a tool. Let me provide some context first. So, we're told the best way to be healthy, right, is to eat a healthy diet. And so what we don't want to do, right, is like eat junk food and then it's like, well, now we got to figure out how to get healthy, or get back to, our being whole, because we've been eating the junk food. So I'm just going to put that metaphor out there, right? So oftentimes when parents are wondering, well, how do I have this conversation, right? They're trying to start by having a conversation about racism, right? Maybe something has happened, something in the news. Maybe their child, did a little racist bullying at school, or maybe their child was the subject or object of some racist bullying. And so at that point, then parents are, when there's trauma, when there's some type of injury, parents are wanting to then start the conversation. But I'm here to tell you, that's going to be a horrible place to start. You want to start as early as possible. So just like you're talking to your kids about, the colors of the tree, the color in the sky, the color of the car, you're teaching them color. You can also give them that same colorful information about people, about
Yes.
humans, right? So if you're giving them healthy and positive associations, that is going to feel more of the space. Like that's going to be their root structure, instead of there's nothing there, then something happens, and then they try to figure this out, or you're trying to figure it all out. Okay, so that's what this Hues of You is. It's a way to have or create these positive, healthy, normal, like diversity in nature, and we are nature. Diversity is normal. It's race that has put us in these categories. That is abnormal. That's strange and wrong. And that's why it's so hard to explain. I just was in a class with kids, and the kids are so smart. They get it right away. And I was explaining to them, how we get our different hues, skin tone hues, and, they learn about melanin and the sun and the origins of their ancestors. So that's all in here. And so, and then they are encouraged to name their skin tones. First of all, see the skin tones,
Yeah.
and name them. And right away they said, well, why in the world? Why are we called white and black if we are not actually white and black? And so I quickly looked over at their teachers, to see if I had permission to explain that. I said, do they have any understanding about the founding of the country? They said a little bit. So I just said, okay, I'll start with a little bit. And I just gave them a very general, age appropriate. And when I say age appropriate, I mean like for their development, because of the brain, it struggles to understand abstractions like white people, black people, when we really aren't black and white. I remember struggling as a child. Like I thought because my brother was lighter skinned than me, that he was white, like because I, abstract. So age appropriate meaning developmentally, what can they understand? And so then I told them about how race was really about rules and why these rules were made and put in place. And again, they got it. So, I created this activity book because kids were asking so many questions. And then the adults were saying, well, we don't know the answers to those questions, or we don't know how best to answer the questions. So, if we can tell our kids that, this is red, and this is why the leaves on the tree are green, and this is why when we look at the sky, we see the color blue. Sometimes when we look at the lake, the water is blue. Sometimes when we look at the lake, the water is green. So if you can do that, right, you can explain to your kids why people look, their phenotype is different. So your hair texture and color, your eye color, your skin color. So when they have that as an understanding, then they don't walk around, or they don't go to school and say, oh, is your skin brown because you're dirty? Or is your skin brown because you drank chocolate milk? Or, you know, is your skin not brown because somehow you're blank? I don't know, like the things that kids say. And then also kids are so curious and they want to ask questions in public at very inappropriate times.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Ask that question a lot too. Like, what do you do when your child says something that is, you know, probably embarrassing to an adult? Well, that's another reason why you need to have already given them positive, healthy language and a framework. Because then when they do inevitably ask the question, they're going to ask it and it's going to be positive, right? So, you know, my child one day yelled in the McDonald's drive-through line. She was talking about the woman who was working the drive-through. She was like, "Mommy, she has way more melanin than you." And, and I said, "Yes, she does. Isn't it beautiful?" But see that, but that she had the right words. If she didn't have a framework and an understanding, she might have said something like, you know, something derogatory, or she might have associated some, you know, meaning, because when we don't understand, our brain just makes up a meaning. And that could have been painful for that woman to hear. But, you know, when I responded the way that I did, the woman smiled and she nodded, because yes, I was affirming my child's observation, but I was also affirming that this woman's skin tone is beautiful. So, yeah.
It's really reminding me of, you know, that part in Kurt Thompson's interview where he talked about neural networks that get combined together. So he was talking about it in terms of performance and shame, and how with our kids, you know, sometimes those neural networks cross and then it creates a pattern where of like, you know, old performance. Well, it's reminding me of that, in that like what you're doing is creating positive neuro network crossing. And that is incredible, because you're actually harnessing that power in the brain, because somehow we've mistakenly combined the wrong things, right? In our past.
Shamed it, right? He talked about that. Like, so for many of adults, because we have so much shame around race and racism, for whatever reason, then we silence our kids or we shame our kids when they have these questions. So I'm sorry, go ahead. You were saying.
Keep going. No, keep going on your thoughts.
No, so I was just coloring that point, is that so even adults who want to like reconfigure the networks, right? And they don't want their children to have the shame that they had growing up, or they don't want their children to be silenced and shut down the way that they were silenced and shut down. Well, they don't know what to say or do, or they don't know the how. Oh, how do I begin to build those positive, you know, pathways or those neural networks? Well, here you go. Let me pull this together for you. And again, you know, this wasn't random. This came from, again, my background in education, in which we have to understand how the brain works and how people learn and how children learn. But also because I worked with hundreds of children, and I had, you know, done some things over and over. And, you know, I gathered their questions. I saw the things that they were curious about. Sometimes they would ask me something that I didn't know the answer to. So I went and researched the answer, got back to the child, but I also put that in the book. So, right. So then people who, like, you know, our generation who didn't get this understanding as a child, well, I want to help us out. So here this is. And in a way, again, it's all about creating a healthy, positive pathway and strengthen that. And so when you have children that understand that, oh, phenotype diversity is normal within a human experience, there is no way that they can embody race and racism the way that we have, you know, because they already have like this fundamental understanding of our interconnectedness as humans.
So good, Lucretia. And I just keep thinking this isn't just for kids. Like I would recommend this for adults, to work through. I mean, why Hues of You is for everyone, in my opinion.
So here's the secret. I first started doing these activities with adults. I designed them for adults because when even the adults who chose to come to the class or the learning experience to learn, they were bringing in so much baggage and so much shame. And so I thought, if I could just first start with the whole instead of starting with the broken, right? Let's start with the whole. Let's talk about how we're all hues of brown. And then, first of all, that just throws people off their game. Like, wait, we're coloring, we're painting. So they are in their, they're in this anti-racism class or their racial healing class, and we're giggling and we're laughing and we're having a good time. So first of all, walls, are torn down. People relax, they take a deep breath, and then the brain starts asking these questions. So wait, we're all this interconnected humanity, and we only look different because of these few things. What in the world is race? And that's exactly what I want. I want the learner to be asking these questions, because then the brain will be open to the answers. So yes, these activities were first done with adults, and then people asked me, okay, so can you do these with children? And then this evolved into the activity book.
I love it. Lucretia, this is so wonderful. It's so good. And it's rooted, like you said, in education, in neuroscience, and really in a way that it works for us as people, as a whole person. It works for us, and it can bring that healing and that education that we need. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thanks for coming on today. This has been just delightful to have you. And I just so appreciate your voice in the world. Like I said, strong and gentle. It's who you are.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your encouragement. And thank you for seeing the value in me and my work. And thank you for the invitation to be on today.
I love it. All right. Thanks, Lucretia. Bye.
Bye-bye.